Walter Rodney Groundings. This is a special edition. I'm David Hinds, sitting in for our regular moderator, Dion Abrams. It's June 13th, and it's that time of the year when we in the Working People's Alliance, along with other patriots in Guyana, in the Caribbean, and the rest of the world, remember our brother Walter Rodney, who was assassinated June 13, 1980. So this year it's the 37th anniversary of that assassination. As we do every year, we try to reflect on Rodney's life, his example, but more than that, we try to use his ideas and his memory to speak to contemporary issues, and that's what we're going to do on this edition of Walter Rodney Groundings. The program, as you can tell from the name, is appropriately named after Rodney, not because we want to celebrate Rodney as some individualist out there, but as someone who contributed tremendously to Guyana, the Caribbean, Africa, and the rest of the world, bringing to bear his outstanding talents in his short life and making a difference in the world. And so today we want to remember him. I have with me in the studio a panel of WPA members. To my immediate left is Dr. Wazir Mohammed, who's a longtime WPA activist. He's a sociologist and he teaches in the United States of America. Professor Clive Thomas is no stranger to you. I wouldn't attempt to go through his biography. and our brother Tacuma Ogunseye, executive member of the WPA, political activist and commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to this edition of African Drums.
Thank you.
I want to start. Sorry, there we go. I'm getting mixed up. The Walter Rodney Groundings, not African Drums. Walter Rodney Groundings. My apologies. Let's start by talking a little bit about the importance of Rodney to the contemporary situation as we sit here in 2017. Why and how is Walter Rodney important to Guyana? Wazir, we want to start with you.
Well, I mean, Walter's importance have to do in relationship to Guyana. First of all, we must start with his political activism. His political activism is based on this ethos, on the ethos that that for the working people, that bread and justice must be connected. I think Clive was the person who coined that term, if I'm, and you could correct me.
Right, in a very important
yes,
booklet, which
yes.
is one of the major publications, and I would say reading for any young person who wants to understand the political economy of post-colonial Guyana and the Caribbean.
Right, and the second point that we have to note about the importance of Rodney politically is the importance of what he meant by people's power. And that's a very important contribution, which as Guyanese we need to reflect on 37 years on, because it is deeply rooted not in his scholarship, it is deeply rooted in his writings, in how Europe underdeveloped Africa. It comes out of that tradition that what we need is to create democracy in which more people in the society have access to the economic resources of the society, to the social resources, to the cultural resources. So it's important that as we mark this 37th year since his assassination, to also note the fact that the working people today is not much better off than they were at the time when he was killed. I mean, I think it would be remiss of us if we were to sit here and not explain some of these conditions. When I drive through South Georgetown and I see the flooding, it makes me shudder.
And we are certainly...
And among the ordinary people, where ordinary people live.
And we certainly are going to key into that, Wazir, as we continue the program. I want to bring Clive in because for our viewers, especially younger viewers, Clive Thomas is a contemporary of Walter Rodney, very close to him, both in terms of working together in the Working People's Alliance, but as contemporary scholars who played an important role, in a sense, shaping the post-colonial thinking in the Caribbean and beyond. Clive, bring Walter up to 2017 and its relevance?
Well, I'd like to begin by first of all acknowledging most of what Wazir said and you have said in the introduction as being essentially very important. But I'd like to start at a different end of the stories. I was writing during that period, and some of the things that we mentioned, bread and justice, etc. Some of these ideas are long-lasting and perhaps in some ways lasting forever because they're central ideas to people's existence and they go right back, as Walt himself would admit, to the early progressive development of Marxian ideas in the 19th century. But I would want to begin this contribution by recognizing that it's 37 years since he died. That's 4 decades. We can't not recognize that the conditions have changed since then. The contradictions facing the country has changed since then. And therefore we have to make the theory relevant to existing reality. That is what I think Walter would have wanted us to do. But I fear that there's a tendency to sort of glorify the past and see the present and the future through the eyes of the past. And I think that would be a fundamental mistake. For example, the comment that was made that conditions haven't changed in 40 years, I think is fundamentally incorrect. If you look at the real lives of people today, take a simple example. Almost everybody in Ghana has a cell phone. That is more computing capacity than any country had 40 years ago. So the conditions they face now are not the same as if they were back then. The issue is a relative issue. People have not grown maybe as fast and as much as they can. The conditions of life will not change as much as we have a potential to change them. But I think it would be wrong to start from the premise that the conditions now have somebody else regressed now worse than we were 40 years ago. And I think Walter would have wanted us to begin at that starting point. But I think it's a very populist concept in Guyana. Everybody says the education today is worse than we had when they were growing up. And it's a very facile thing to say, but it's very believable by many people. I've sat in my living room and argued to death with persons, including my family, who would tell me that things were better then. In some ways they were. In some ways they were. People would pay more attention to learning and that type of thing. That's what the environment in which I grew up. But you can't also shut your eyes to what the capabilities of people are today. I mean, the ability to handle, let's say, modern digitalization is greater than I had as a youth. It is therefore so transformative that it would be a very basic mistake for us to think that we rooted in a pre-Walter Rodney situation.
Professor Clive Thomas, words of wisdom, bringing to bear the dialectics of the conversation that we must have, that while Rodney's ideas definitely are relevant today, that certainly things have changed 40 years on. And it is the reason that we have to have this kind of discussion so as to situate the past in the present and the present in the past and the future. Because one thing Walter Rodney and the people of his generation who thought about where Guyana and the Caribbean and the world would be in the future, one of the things that they would acknowledge that change is inevitable, and that those of us who see the world in progressive ways have to contend with those changes and make sense of them.
And maybe we can discuss after everybody has spoken how we identify the changes today.
Yes.
And the crucial dynamics.
Certainly. I want to bring in you, Tacuma Ogunseye. And again, I want to reintroduce Tacuma to the audience because Tacuma is what we would call your salt of the earth working class person who for a long time would say, look, I am a market vendor. I'm someone who's there on the ground and who has risen in the political ranks of the WP and today is one of our leading political activists and thinkers, showing the nexus between coming out of the bowels of the working class and being able to articulate political views and political thinking. And I say that because Ogun would be the person that Walter Rodney would have been most interested in, the working class, and how do we use the energies of the working class in order to push our country forward. Ogun, bring Walter, as the others have done, into the present.
Before I go to that point, I want to join with Clive. I remember the previous program we had on the Walter Rodney Groundings. I was making the point that, we were making a kind of observation about literacy in the country. And I was making the point that, we got to redefine literacy in light of the new situation, because what I found on the ground, there are a lot of young people who can't read and write properly. And you say are literate. They're more literate on the computer and the phone than I
am.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that Clive raised this point, because I think we have to keep looking at the situation and find the objective situations where we could cultivate responses that people on the ground could identify with. In terms of Rodney's relevance, I think Rodney's relevance is reflected in the objective dilemma which I see the country is faced with. When Walter was active, one of the things his activism did in reflecting on a difficult situation for working people, the racial polarization, the economic downturn at the time, his activism raised hope and high expectations among the sitting ordinary people that we could find as a country a resolution to these economic and political difficulties. And when we look at the present situation, I think that the formation, the APMU, the defeat of the PPP by the APMU AFC coalition created that great expectations in the consciousness of people that, look, at last we could begin to deal fundamentally with these challenges. And as I reflect on 79 when Walter died, that hope began to die, even though we did quite a lot to keep it going. And I'm feeling now that the hope that we had created after the defeat of PPP in 2015, I'm worried that I begin to feel it's been dying. The question of it being dying is slowly creeping in. And I think that we have to recognize that as political people, and Walter would have been careful in trying to analyze the phenomena, to try to understand what is happening and what we have to do. And it's in that sense, I think that this reflection on Walter's work, life, and his ideas become extremely important, because I believe if we lose it now, we're going to lose it for a long time in the country.
And I want to continue on that point that you raised, which is the raising of the hopes of the people, exciting people through activism, giving them hope that another world is possible. And the ebb and flow of that, we saw it, as you said, heightened around, beginning in 2011, culminating in 2015. And within 2 years, there is a sense that it is beginning to ebb again, beginning to low. See why I want to bring you in here and to try to explain for us, in the type of society that we are, what accounts for that kind of ebb and flow of the enthusiasm of the people?
Well, there are many things,
Yeah.
but I think one important one that very often I think really is the task of the WPA people to articulate is that there are two fundamental contradictions at the very least that are taking place and that we have not focused enough on. One is that in a fundamental sense, our economy is being driven by the search for extractive materials in the ground. There's a fundamentally extractive-based economy, gold, diamonds, logging, whatever we have. And now there's the coming of oil. That is inconsistent with the orientation and commitment of this state by the present government, the coalition government, to develop a green state. So that is the first contradiction that we face. The second contradiction we face is that in the management of the state, you can't move from what I call the criminalized state to one that is not criminalized without a conscious effort to deconstruct it. If not, you're going to leave in place all the opportunities for that to flourish after a period of time. So those are, to my mind, the two fundamental areas in which we have to struggle for the future. I think in the debates that are taking place in Ghana, they're very superficial. People never get back to these issues. They seem to feel that what is most popular. There's almost a fight for popularity. The most popular thing you can say, or like this, is considered not important. I know people have criticized me for writing on oil. How could you, if you feel these are the two most fundamental contradictions this country is going through, not spend all the time that I've spent on focusing on oil? Because that's where the future lies. That's where the government expects that there be a new economy to emerge. But that itself has a lot of problems, and that is why we thought in making this statement today and making the call for the publication of the contract with the ExxonMobil and the partners, we're making an important contribution in the spirit of Walter Rodney to life in Ghana.
In case you're in case you're just joining us, this is Walter Rodney Groundings. It's a special issue of the program. It's June 13th, and it's the 37th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Walter Rodney, who was one of the major leaders of the WP, and some would argue the major inspiration for the struggles, not only the anti-dictatorial struggles of the 1970s when he was here, but also the struggles linking up the working peoples of Guyana with the working peoples in the rest of the Caribbean. Walter played an important role in doing that, but also played an important role in envisaging a new Guyana. So it was not just about fighting the regime of the day, but about articulating a vision for Guyana. And I want to stress that as we think about Walter Rodney and honor Walter Rodney, it was not just about protest for the sake of protest, it was about how we shape a new society. And Clive mentioned just now, Dr. Clive Thomas, that there is a responsibility of the Working People's Alliance in a country in which, as Clive argues, we have become part of this instant conversation and not really thinking deeply about the issues and about where we want to take Guyana. And he mentioned the whole deconstruction of the state. There's none other person who's more qualified, I think, in Guyana and perhaps the rest of the Caribbean to speak about that. I want to commend to young people The Rise of the Authoritarian State in the Periphery, a very important text written and published by Professor Clive Thomas in 1984. And yes, it was written 30 odd years ago, but I think a lot of what is written in that was really relevant in trying to understand the state here in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean, and one would say the rest of what we call the developing world. We want to focus for the rest of the program, not exclusively, but try to build a conversation on that, on what we call the coming of the oil economy and what that means for Guyana. It is not that other things are not important, but in terms of the development of the political economy, as Professor Clive Thomas just articulated, we have to think about that and what that means. Because the coming of oil is being touted by many as the coming of wealth for Guyana, and then all our woes will go and so forth. We would like to argue that it is much more fundamental than that. Let's, brothers, get to this question of the oil. And I want to start with a statement by the WPA this past week, in which the Working People's Alliance has noted the continued withholding of the general publication of the contract between ExxonMobil and its partners with the government of Guyana. We believe this to be unwise for several reasons, including in particular the fact that such contracts are publicly available online for countries with odious authoritarian reputations and wrapped with severe domestic and internal external conflicts. We are calling for the publishing to begin with of this agreement. Some are saying that, we can't do that because the Venezuelans will see what is going on, all that kind of stuff. With all due respect, brothers, let's ask Clive to open this section of the conversation and set the tone. Clive, why is it important for us to,
very
to
important.
publish?
For several reasons. I think, first of all, Guyanese are not aware of how common oil refineries and that type of thing are around the world. Over 116 countries today possess oil refineries. And some of them are easily not distinguished as being rapidly growing economies. In the Caribbean alone, we have 14 countries. Many people are shocked when I tell them that, with oil refineries. In CARICOM, we have 3. And some of them, like Jamaica, with 1, and they plan the second, are not distinguished by the growth. So this is not a panacea. This is not a salve for every wound that we have. So that we have to be very careful, we have to be very modest in what we do. The second thing is that we have seen from historical experiences over the last 2 or 3 decades, with so many countries having oil refineries, that certain principles clearly apply. One of them is that corruption feeds on the oil sector, because it feeds on the extractive sectors we know, with gold and all the things that are going on. If we're trying to deconstruct the criminal state and we don't do it before we get oil, it will get such a resurgence that will be completely unimaginable to us. The scope and the magnitude of the wealth and corruption that becomes possible. And we as WPA have a responsibility to guide people to recognize this is what is facing our future. We have to recognize also that there's no shortcut about a refinery. Refineries come in all shapes and sizes. The world's largest refinery might be like the one in India. It's producing 1.24 million barrels a day. The ones that we probably trying to produce in Ghana will be probably 100,000. This is less, as I put in the article last Sunday's paper, 0.1% of the global refinery capacity. But at the same time, there's the contradiction that most refineries in the world are small. And they don't only exist in small countries. They exist even in the United States, where we live. More than half the US refineries are less than 100,000 barrels a day. So that the prevalence of these things would suggest that there's a wide variation in possibilities when you look at these things. And you have to make careful economic calculations about which direction you want to go. But it's very popular, I imagine, to say, we want a refinery because this is what we expect. That has been a tradition of nationalization going back to the period when Walt and I were writing a song. That's the tradition. But we have to look at the experiences that have occurred since then and begin to ask ourselves, what is the most rational thing we can do? To my mind, I mean, I don't want to lay a pronouncement because I've not been involved in any discussions on the future of oil. Move in the direction of natural gas, move in the direction of powering plants here, and replacing the fossil fuels that we have placed. Import, that is the optimal way to go. But I've not done a feasibility study in it, so I can't say for sure this is right. That is the direction to go. Because if we want to also build a green state, the cleanest fuel among the lot there is natural gas. But it may not be renewable like hydropower. It is less polluting, far less polluting of the atmosphere than the other fuel that we can also use, which is oil.
Wazir, let me bring you in here because you started off with a very passionate plea about the condition of the working people and looking at it in its historical perspective and making the argument that the condition of the working people from a large political economy standpoint is not as rosy as we would like it to be. And I want you to make the linkage between the coming of oil and the condition of the working people. Is it a panacea? Do you believe that the coming of oil will just without any particular intervention on the part of the government and the state without any really serious thinking, as Brother Clive has been saying. Do you think that this would lead to an improvement in the conditions of the working class without those things?
Well, we have to begin by where we are starting, and that is the call for the constructing of the state. And as part of that mechanism, for contracts like this to be made public, to be transparent, for people to get involved, I think the government started off with some discussions publicly. Those should continue, but that should continue in the face of the contract being made public, and let the public have a chance of conversing and debating it publicly. I myself visited Ithaca at the beginning of this process, a small community which is right outside of the closest oil field in Bobis. And the communities are hoping to be engaged in relationship to what benefits they will get, and they're prepared. But what we have to do is that the communities have to be engaged in the discourse on the way forward. This is what the constructing the state means in practical terms. It means bringing the people into the process of change so that benefits can accrue to the communities. Yeah? I mean, when we talk about deconstructing the state, it also means deconstructing the notion, the way contracts are given out, the way in which the same people who have been getting the contracts are still getting the contracts, in which there are really very little transparency. I mean, it is a shame that this country does not have an architectural design unit, nor a quantity surveying unit that can determine that the estimates that are going before Parliament for capital projects are real estimates, so that when somebody is bidding for a contract, it is based on some real figures. You see, we can't, in deconstructing the notion of the state, we have to look at practice, and we have to address those practices. But the way to address it is to involve people, to involve the neighborhood councils, to give power back to the people, or to empower people, as they would say. And so, deconstructing the state, yes, is aligned to creating a green state, because we have to engage in a discourse in which people are educated, in which remedial education becomes a factor, in which people are taught how the best practices on how to use the internet. Yeah. Yes, we have access to the internet, and everybody have cell phones. We have to. So we it's all connected. It's all connected. I mean, and when you have children going to school in these communities in South, and I want to come back here, right, that are going to school without breakfast in the morning, it's a problem. And if we have a state, yeah, and we have children who are going to school without breakfast, it's a problem. And if we have oil on the horizon, yeah, how is that going to solve? Are we going to wait for oil to be able to pump money in these communities, or are we going to begin discussions now in relationship to what platforms we can set up in these communities so that we can begin to deal with these problems?
Involving the people.
Involvement of the people.
Involving the people in the discourse around oil and other important issues as they relate to the political
movement. It's important
movement.
they're doing that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's absolutely important. I'm not trying to downplay it. You build up their awareness with knowledge.
No.
We have to inform people. Most people pass on opinions and expect people to buy them wholesale. Mm-hmm. I think this is so, and then they are bludgeoning you down and say this is the only way to go. I think what we need to do is to inform the public. Education, maybe because I've been a teacher all my life, is the real foundation for the new state that we want to create.
Brother
we have
Ogun,
to have an informed public.
Have we, to your mind and to, in the view of the WPA, have we begun to do that kind of conversation with the people as we think about oil coming on stream?
Not in a really profound way. There is some public discourse on oil generated by the government, and some generated by patriotic Guyanese who wish to see that the oil industry develop in a way that is positive, bearing in mind what happened in Trinidad, Africa, and many other countries where you have this tremendous oil wealth and is being stolen, and the masses are left without anything significant. So that discourse is a very fundamental discourse, and I don't think we have done enough to educate the people on the discourse. But I also want to look at some of the contradictions. You see, whether we like it or not, whether the government handle oil properly or don't handle oil properly, in my view, oil will have a transformative effect in the country one way or the other. Obviously, as patriots, we would like to make sure that the transformational effects benefit the masses. But if we don't open up the debate in a genuine way, and we don't build up the political culture among the political directorate, both on the government side and the opposition side, to have a frank, and candid discussion, I think the contradictions with the oil money could greatly drive this country into tremendous internal strives, because there'll be a lot to fight over. And I'm very concerned that we're not. One of the sad things about this new dispensation is that the level of debate, both in public domain, is not the quality they used to have in the 70s. And I'm also disappointed that even the APMU, there's no genuine discussion on national policies. There's no way in the APMU, even if the top leadership can't meet, the middle leadership could meet and discuss contradictions and problems. You don't have a sense, as a political person, don't have a sense of being involved in shaping a profound way national policy. And I think that there's tremendous energies within the alliance, in the PNC, in the WPA, in all the other groups in the thing, that if we find a platform to have discourse, it will strengthen the whole body politic and the culture of the country.
Ogun, let me pin you on that, and I want to ask that respectfully. Is there a role for the WPA as a political entity in that? Does the WPA have to wait on the APNU to raise that discussion, or does the WPA do it independent?
Okay, there's a role for the WPA, but see, we have to bear in mind the culture that we live in. Now, the WPA, as part of a government, has whether we like it or not, we have a responsibility to the government. We are part of the government. We share some amount of collective responsibility. We also have, as a political party, a duty to our constituents in the general country. And we have had to be balancing the two. And unfortunately, in this equation, we also have the historical problem with the PNC, the Rodney killing. Then we had, just as the government came to power, we had the ending of the Rodney Commission of Inquiry, and the position, and all of those things have complicated the political equation. And the WPA have agonized for months over how best for us to deal in this situation and to make sense to the ordinary people. You see, we have to make sure whatever we do as a party, it is not only understood by us, the activists, but the masses out there. And you were surprised to realize that the consciousness out there in our constituents, let me separate the PP constituents for the time being, in the APMU AFC constituents, people are agonized over the thought of there being a rift between the WPA and the PNC in the coalition. There's people are agonizing over it, and it became very potent during the commission inquiry. But we handled it, and I think we come out of it, without much damage. And as WPA, we've been conscious of it. But I think that after having experienced 2 years of the coalition government, the WPA have done its best to act responsible in the coalition. I think it is time that the WPA begin to be more assertive in the coalition and in the country. But the problem we have, for me, is that we don't have a means to propel our ideas that we control. This is very important, because when you begin to articulate positions, it becomes somewhat complex at times, and you have to be able to explain and to fight within that complexity. And I'm not comfortable that we have the means at our disposal to wage the kind of struggle we need at the level of ideas, and to support it with the institutional backings and resources.
Tacuma Ogunseye, executive member of the WPA, saying that after 2 years, the WPA has to assert itself more. And as we talk about oil, as we talk about the coming of the oil economy and what that means for the country, what it means especially for the poor and ordinary people of the country, that the Working People's Alliance, perhaps, given its own history and its own tradition, is best placed and probably has the kind of integrity to lead such a discussion, notwithstanding the difficulties that Brother Ogun has mentioned. And I think that is part of what we want to begin here on this program. It's Walter Rodney Groundings. No, I am not Dion Abrams. This is David Hinds. Dion Abrams has the show off, and I'm usurping his position just for the show. It's a special program. It's June 13th, and it's Walter Rodney's day, Walter Rodney's month. Brother Walter Rodney was assassinated on June 13, 1980, bringing to an end 6 years of tremendous and intense activism in Guyana. And all independent thinkers and even thinkers that are not sympathetic to Rodney's ideas would conclude that those years made a difference in the post-colonial trajectory of Guyanese politics and by extension Caribbean politics. We would like to remember Walter as someone who fought so tirelessly to really bring a sense of multi-ethnic solidarity to the struggles of the people here in this country. And while we talk about this multi-ethnic work, we sometimes do not speak about the ways in which he was able to stand as a bridge between the working classes and some of the professional class. He himself argued that what we call loosely here in the Caribbean and Guyana, the middle classes, have a role to play, especially those of us who have come out of the bowels of the working people, who only yesterday were running around in little villages as poor boys and poor girls. And Walter felt that we have a responsibility, and he himself became the example of that. So it's about its multiracial work, its work in terms of a national kind of conversation, because that was also part of what he talked about. It's about how do we create a wholesome nation that brings security for all its people. So many like to throw around words that he was a Marxist or he's a black nationalist. He probably was, well, not probably, he was all of those, but above and beyond everything else, he was a concretist who looked at the situation and asked what is there to be done and how do we use the particular situation, the particular conditions to really raise questions and answer questions. And we in the WPA would like to keep afresh those ideas and those approaches. It was not only his ideas, but it's his approaches. And I would also like to say something else, that, you know, we talk about Rodney, and I want to stress that we don't want to talk about Rodney as a great man, because Rodney was part of something that was larger than himself. Yes, he became the chief spokesperson, as CLR James would argue, that, you know, it was a convergence of person, time, and place. But even before Rodney came back to Guyana in 1974, that others in Ratoon at the University of Guyana, led by Clive Thomas and Josh Ramsamy and Maurice Odle, and Askre, led by Kwayan and Ogunseye and others, and IPRA, led by Moses Bagwan, had begun to do work, multiracial work among the working classes, paving the way for Rodney. So when he came, he was able to take advantage of that and, in a sense, help to lift us to another level. So we want to distinguish our conversation about Walter Rodney from the conversation of all the other great men, and they were for the most part men, and try to situate Rodney in something that was a movement that he was a part of. Sometimes we hear that he was a founder of the WPA, and without trying to take away from Rodney, that the WPA was founded before Rodney arrived in Guyana. That doesn't take away from him, because he was able to come here and be part of this process, inspiring young people like myself. We're young teenagers, 13, 14, hearing Rodney for the first time and answering that call to be part of something transformative. And so today, we remember Walter by talking about contemporary Guyana. We are talking about oil. We're talking about what that means for Guyana going forward. Because as Brother Ogunseye said just now, one way or the other, Guyana will be transformed with the coming of oil. Professor Clive Thomas, lay out for us. Oil is coming. What are the 2-3 scenarios that we can have with the coming of oil?
Well, we can have many more than that. If we look at the experiences around the world, the probably core of them that we can have. We can have what happened right here in the Caribbean, what happened in Trinidad. All petrodollars and no cents. We can go to Jamaica, still poor and struggling to get out. Venezuela, with the crisis right next door and the threat of a conflagration. We can go to Suriname, where it still remains, although indigenous and a serious effort to develop it by local scientific talent, it still remains a marginal part of its existence. All these things we can find as examples. But going back to the debate, I feel that in the search for ideas, what happened at the time of Walter Rodney is that other persons participated in the process of exchange. Other scholars intervened. They had ideas, they shared them, they disagreed or they agreed. Some came over to Walter's ideas, others did not. But in the process, there was a contradiction that generated new ideas and a higher level of understanding. My contribution can now be only at the level of ideas. And I've labored to try to bring the oil thing to focus. But it's sad to tell you that nobody in the political forces ever discussed this with me at any point in time. They never felt it even important to write about it. Yet a lot of people have done so, but these are persons sometimes outside the country. They're students, not yet at the level where they have influence to make decisions about ideas, but none of the political forces. And I find it absolutely amazing that this could happen at a point at this time. There'll be no seminar, no nothing ever been suggested or any discussion locally. One person called me about 2 months ago to sit down, asked me to speak on some platform, some program that they are running, I think on a regular basis. I've never heard from them again. So, in a sense, what we try to do is to put the WTA or the perception of these issues, because they're fundamental for the future development of Guyana there. Nothing is happening. So one begins to wonder whether the timing is right, when the society is aware of the cusp and what it stands, or whether the inertia has taken over, and whether there's the creative capacity of the political class to deal with the future.
The creative capacity of the ruling class, something that Walter Rodney agonized over.
Yeah.
Always saying that when the working people seem to be ready, the leaders are never ready to take to another level. Clive, I asked the question just now and I'm going to rephrase the question. What is the worst case scenario when oil comes? And what is the best case scenario when oil comes?
Well, the worst case scenario is the country being cannibalized by external threats, external claims. That is why I would not altogether discount the external factor in the future of oil. That's the worst case scenario that I can imagine. Because in many countries, oil, the finding of oil has been the location of serious external conflict and sometimes internal conflict. As the state begins to fracture, people begin to set up regional governments, bandit groups begin to try to seize the oil to generate revenues for themselves or to hold hostage those who work in oil. A lot of things can happen. At the moment, most of our oil is located offshore, but that doesn't mean there is not even more oil onshore, because there's something called the mirror theory. There is one continent between Africa, one landmass between Africa and South America, and that drifted apart. So the oil that we're finding in the Caribbean and South America is the exact mirror image of the oil that is on the western coast of Africa. And so the formation suggests that that's where the oil is really located, when it is one homogeneous mass. And the potential for this is enormous. I've tried to detail how the studies have been done by the U.S. Geological Survey. They think maybe the third biggest oil find ever. So there's potentially a lot of resources around. So the best case scenario is that those come on stream and that we're able to handle it wisely. You know, do all the things that we should be doing to generate a high level of income for Guyanese, to ensure that we become, all of us become, living at a level that takes us beyond the reach of any poverty or anything like that. And then maybe begin to build a more cultured, non-racial society. That's the best case scenario.
A cultured, non-racial society, and I want to go there. I want to go there because we are remembering Walter, and I also want to go there because we were in 2017 in Guyana. Ogun and then Wazir. Are there ethnic implications with the coming of oil?
Clearly, that's what I was hinting when I made the point.
Well,
that,
go beyond hinting now.
I mean, I don't want to be, be responsible of scaring people. But let me be very candid, and this is happening in the African community. The African activists are saying, look, the country has evolved in the area where the economy is dominated by non-African forces, mainly Indians and Portuguese and so forth. And they're saying that if oil enter based upon using the market and the normal conventional procedures, Africans are not well placed in the economy to benefit from the oil in flow, which will further worsen the gap between the ethnic groups. And Africans are saying that there's no discussion that, okay, we will a little more concrete. For the last 20 years or so, Africans in the public service have had to be lived on minimum wages, which have worsened the economic position. To date, this government haven't found a way of addressing that matter. African activists are saying that with oil coming, they expect significant improvement in the African community. But you have the dilemma. Unless there is a political understanding that African Amerindian groups who are economically at disadvantage should have some kind of special arrangements coming out of oil flow to improve the situation. And we don't use the formula that let the market decide everything. Okay? So there's the fear in the African community that there's no discussion. The political environment is not of that to allow that discussion. And there's a lot of tension in the African community whether we're going to have new inflow of funds and a continuation of African poverty. So it's a big, bitter battle in the community and because I guess the African leadership in the main is in power, it is being, it's being managed. But we run the risk of it spilling over. Now we have the question of the sugar industry. Now, all Guyanese, okay, would want that there's some understanding that as we agree, even though we don't have the agreement, I mean, the PP is playing politics. But there is a general agreement that something has to be done to renovate sugar. Sugar can't continue in the old way. There should be some assurances to sugar workers that even if we don't fix it right immediately, that there should be some assurances that sugar workers who may lose or who may be negatively affected by the transformation would have some safety, special safety arrangement coming out of our revenue to help to create a situation that is more humane. I think these are some of the conversations that we need, and with the absence of those conversations, we run the risk of the situation, taking on its own logic, and we become victim of this good possibility.
And,
of
so,
having-
and certainly we are beginning that conversation today. The fears in the African Guyanese community, the linkage between oil and the sugar industry. Wazir, Mohammed, you have had a lot to say about sugar, rice, although we're not talking about rice, but the linkage is here. Fears in the Indian Guyanese community, linkage between oil and sugar?
Well, I mean, the fears in the Indian Guyanese community, I mean, because the Indian Guyanese community have been located, not so much in sugar. We particularize sugar, but rice. And we have not, we don't have a national conversation about what has happened in rice. The disappearance of 30,000 rice farmers since 1970. With that, a certain erosion of rural culture, especially in a lot of the Indian communities, that is feeding back into the national discourse. Certainly the question of sugar has to be discussed, but the question we're going to raise about conversations, this is where, we have to engage in conversations, both within those communities and across communities. If we have to address the question of the most disadvantaged. And there are disadvantaged in both Indian and African communities. We can argue which community is more disadvantaged, but there are issues that all of these communities faced. I mean, I went up to Bushlot, for instance, 2 weeks ago, and I was surprised, driving on the roadside, and you think this is a very prosperous community, and you go behind the houses on the roadside, and you see that there are children coming to school without breakfast in the morning. So the issues is how we tackle, from a national standpoint. I would like to see we actually do social cohesion. I've said publicly that cohesion cannot be done through billboards. It has to be done through conversations, so that communities can be involved in charting their future. The sugar workers are faced with this crisis, and this crisis is national. This conversation should be taken directly to the sugar workers, and the sugar workers should be involved in the conversation. The same should be true with rice. We're not telling people the truth. We have to engage people in a more direct way with truth telling. And out of truth telling, let the conversations of the community level began. When Walter came back here, as you rightfully said, there was a ferment in the society, and that ferment had to do with the intervention that was taking place through the trade union movement, with all the discussions that Clive, Harold Lachman, Rudy James, a number of Miles Fitzpatrick, a number of people in the society outside the margins of the WPA were involved in actual discourse, economic, political, social, cultural
Lloyd
discourses.
Best.
Lloyd Best. There was an actual ferment of conversation. Though that is absent from this society. Where is civil society? Where is the Guyana Bar Association? Where are institutions like that? Where are you had a committee of professional engineers who were active. All these people were active. You had architects who were active. Like you remember all those groups, citizens groups, who were actively involved. It's a certain. I don't know if that society has disappeared, but as we meet to talk about Walter Rodney 37 years after, I think it's important that we make these points about the absence of that social discourse, of that discourse that can feed into the politics of the country, and because we need wide-ranging discourses.
And we are by no means not faulting ourselves for not doing more in that regard. One could add to Wazir's questions, where is the WP? Well, the WP is here. We are initiating this discussion as a means of getting our communities involved. I always tell people that as a little boy in Buxton, when the WPA would come to speak, I always wondered why the farmers would come out from the back dam very early and congregate at the line top. And while we young people were excited to hear the Walter Rodneys and so on, they wanted to hear Clive Thomas. And it was not until I got older that I realized Clive Thomas was talking about sugar, and he was talking about cane farming. And that is what they were involved with. So there was a conversation between the workers in their communities, in their place of work, with our intellectual activists. And I dare say that perhaps that is what we want to reinvigorate. One could say it's latently there. Dr. Clive Thomas, sugar, oil, bread and justice, and multi-ethnicity, a lot there for you.
A lot. That's the whole basket of ideas that is shooting Ghana. Yes. I have a lot to handle. But talking about sugar, because I'm now deeply involved in the sugar industry, there's an attempt and an effort now to diversify into other industries, but this effort, insofar as I'm engaged in it, is not being pioneered with a view of trying to dispossess the working class or the working forces in industry. We've never had an instruction along that line. We've never had an instruction to pursue it as a political item. But we know that over the years, the previous government has built up a tremendous constituency of support for that government, based on the fact that the wages, the salaries that are being paid compared to the rest of the Guyanese population, I don't want to say what's extreme, because I don't want to say that these people didn't deserve it. They fought for it through their unions and they got it. But relatively speaking, it was very noticeable. I usually give the example of a typical cane cutter working for 7 months a year. We found that the median income was sometimes into the billions per annum. And in fact, more than what my wife won, more than 20 years after she was a professional. And they didn't tell me wage center. That was the extent to which this was going on. So the constituency is deeply committed to the continuation of that. But the state cannot afford it now. The transfers that are being made from the state to sugar represent roughly $1 billion a month. And that is totally unsustainable. So there has to be a way out of that predicament. So that is where we focus on. The problems with rice, I think Wazir mentioned them, very important and crucial. But I think there again the solution has to lie in the area of finding markets, finding ways of using rice in different, not only value added, but in different, well, true value added in different industries. So that is why, for example, we have decided to opt for aquaculture as a major industry, because we could get about $8,000 per acre as against 2, if so much, in sugar. And they need a lot of, the fish need a lot of feed, and the rice that we're planting at, for example, the experimental project in Wales is intended to provide feed for that fish population, and also to provide, because the land is virgin, seed paddy that could be sold to the farmers for use in other areas. So there again we have a lot of complex and technical problems to deal with, and I think that the only concern I have is that the decisions that have to be made by the shareholders, which is the government, we would hope they were fast enough so that by now we would have been well advanced in where we are wanting to go, but it was only made on the 7th of April.
Sorry.
I mentioned this because there's a program I saw last night where the person who was running the agriculture program was stating that there had been a feasibility study, or should have been, it was not done, but it has been completed, and we in fact spent more than a day last week going through the field, but 3 days when the customers were going through the exercise that they've completed, going through the designs and everything that have started on the ground in Wales. So the project is more advanced than he gave the impression it was, but because he left the employment, he resigned a few months ago. He thinks things are still where they are. And the reason why we could move faster is that we needed a government decision to give us the right to make a move forward.
Professor Clive Thomas, Executive Member of the Working People's Alliance, Chairman of Gaisuko, and many other things. This has been Walter Rodney Groundings. This is a special edition, a special Walter Rodney edition with Clive Thomas. We have had on the program Tacuma Ogunseye and Wazir Mohammed, both executive members of the Working People's Alliance. And today we have tried to use this occasion of Walter Rodney's the anniversary of his assassination to, as we have traditionally done, try to raise questions and to project as to where we think Guyana should go. Walter Rodney contributed so much at the level of scholarship, at the level of activism, level of ideas, and he has left us here in Guyana, in Africa, in other parts of the Caribbean, this body of work that is linked, as Clive Thomas mentioned, to a larger body of work, whether we call them New World or whatever we call them. Certainly, we here in Guyana and English-speaking Caribbean, we have a lot to draw on. We celebrate Rodney, but we celebrate what Rodney was part of and what he contributed to. I know many of you have had questions about where is the voice of the WPA. We would like to think that our voice has always been here. As Brother Ogunseye said, being part of the government has certainly forced upon us a reconsideration of how we engage issues. And as Brother Oguna said, we shall be more assertive. On behalf of Dion Abrams, who is your usual moderator, and the Working People's Alliance, I would like to thank you for tuning in to this edition, this special edition of Walter Rodney Groundings. And keep looking, keep tuning in to this program, because as we says, it's about people's power, no dictator. It's about bread and justice. It's about the struggle goes on and about another world being possible. Thank you and good night.